second principle. Here's another quote from Jocko. It is paramount that senior leaders explain to their junior leaders and troops executing the mission how their role contributes to big picture success. This understanding helps the team members prioritize their efforts in a rapidly changing dynamic environment. That is leading down the chain of command. It requires regularly stepping out of the office and personally engaging in face-to-face conversations with direct reports and observing the frontline troops in action to understand their particular challenges and read them into the commander's intent. All right, so what it's basically describing here is the person in charge in senior leadership needs to get out of their bubble and get down there and know what's going on with their team. That, in a nutshell, is what it's saying. It sounds, it's not necessarily saying, again, of what we just said before, they don't have to know everything about everything. They have to be detached enough that they can do what they need to do as a leader in terms of understanding the big picture and making things work. But they do need to be engaged with what's happening on their team. And I want to, and it doesn't, and it sounds like, and the way that's phrased, it sounds like that it's like, it's more democratic, like, well, as a leader, I can't communicate what the vision is because I have to get input on what the vision is. That's not the idea that we're saying at all. It's like not democratic. There's not a vote on what it is that you're supposed to be doing. However, by having good communication and you have a better understanding of the environment and what's going on, it can help the leader have more focus or more clearly articulate how the vision is going to be carried out by knowing what's happening. So here's the principle in a nutshell. Then we'll look at some scriptures. Good authority figures communicate and care. Say that again. Good authority figures communicate and care. Look at John chapter 10, verse 11 through 16. This principle. So this kind of deals with being in that position of authority and how to be a good leader over who's responsible for people under them. And then we'll kind of show the flip side of that too. But John chapter 10, verse 11 through 16. This is Jesus talking. He says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But a hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep and am known by my own. As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. I want you to see some of the verbs in this passage that describe what a good shepherd does and what a hireling does. Now, we think metaphorically, we're talking about pastors and fake pastors, but this is also good leaders, bad leaders, all right? The good shepherd, the first thing we see is gives, okay? Gives his life for the sheep. And then the next illustration, when we look at the hireling, a good shepherd defends. So you have the good shepherd giving, you have the good shepherd defending. Then you have the Jesus says about the good shepherd, I know my sheep and am known by my own. So we see the good shepherd knows. They have information. They know what's going on. They know their sheep. They know the character of their sheep. They know what their sheep are doing. And it says, and am known. What does that mean? The good shepherd's in the sheep's life enough to be aware of what's happening. And that because the good shepherd is there, which communicates that the shepherd cares, the sheep trust the shepherd because the shepherd's a part of their life. The sheep have access to the shepherd enough that there's a trust there. This is good leadership. Gives, defends, knows, is known, and then what else does the shepherd do? They lays down his life. Okay, this does not sound like the glories of of entitled authority. This sounds like service. This sounds like sacrifice. This sounds like work. This sounds like investment. And it's all those things. And then the last thing it says, and they will hear my voice. What does that imply? A good shepherd speaks. They give, they defend, they know, they're known, they lay down their life, and they speak. Those are some descriptions of what a good shepherd does. Now, by contrast, the hireling, sees the wolf coming and leaves. Why? Because the hireling is in it for money, because the hireling is in it for selfish purposes. It says the hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care. One of the signs of a bad leader is they don't care about the team. They don't care what's happening. They're just protecting their own interests. These are all bad attributes. And so, anyway, Jesus demonstrated excellence as the great master, as Lord, and we refer to this verse earlier on where the disciples are arguing about who's the greatest in the kingdom. He says, who's the one who's the servant of them all. Jesus demonstrated greatness, and what he did is he did it by carrying a cross, not building himself a platform. And that's the difference between a good leader and a bad leader for Christian, in general. We're called to carry a cross. We're called to communicate the gospel and to care about things other than ourselves. And if you do that, you're going to accomplish great things, versus if it's all about you, and building yourself a platform and magnifying your own voice and your own importance. Well, at the end of the day, you don't accomplish very much. Jesus never spent any time tooting his own horn. He didn't have to be a self-promoter. Why? Because the works that he did spoke for themselves. And what Jesus went around and did, that as a great person, as the picture, as the epitome of greatness, what he did is he went around serving. And by serving and investing, he created greatness out of others so that his impact continued long after the cross. The same is true for you and for me, and that is by our service and an investment in what we do for the kingdom of God for others, by not seeking our own ambition, our own way, our own drive, but by pouring ourselves through service into others, we are producing greatness in others. And when you produce a great team, that's far greater than being a great individual, to be on a great team, because great teams win versus great individuals usually are characterized by great teams. So the mistake that a lot of people get into that are ambitious is they're trying to build themselves a platform, or they're big self-promoters. That is not the path to greatness as a Christian. The path to greatness is by service and humility and making the people around you great, and helping the team, communicating and caring. I've mentioned the story about this guy who was wanting to get on the big preacher circuit, and had written a book and published a book, and I can't even remember what the book's called, but it's stupid anyway. He's a surfer, and he's trying to show how surfing is a metaphor for becoming great, and it's ridiculous. But his whole point was how to become. It's almost like discovering your inner greatness, or just some kind of cheesy Oprah Winfrey style narcissistic Christian self-esteem nonsense. But he's talking about I become great because I published a book, and now I'm on a big tour talking about my book, telling other people how they can be great like me, who became great by selling his book. I mean, it's just nonsense. He just created a platform for himself to talk about be great like me by selling these books. By the way, buy my book. It's the opposite of what Jesus did. Jesus didn't go around saying, buy my book, buy my book. Look at how, in fact, a lot of times he says, when he healed somebody, he says, don't tell anybody what I did. Because it was more important. He said, let the works speak for themselves than I go around and say, hey, I've arrived, come worship me. Because that's kind of the spirit of Antichrist, is that self-promotion thing. Jesus wasn't a self-promoter. He didn't hide who he was. He wasn't ashamed of who he was, and he was outspoken at times of who he was, but he but his ministry was characterized by service to others. So um, here's something else, as in terms of communication and in terms of authority figures. Um, you will communicate with others by the questions you ask and the questions you don't ask. So the questions people ask, or the questions that you ask the people, that communicate what your interest is. And if you are asking people on your team certain questions, they'll start to pick up on what kind of questions you're asking, which you're communicating the priority of what you care about. And you have to know that. And by not asking other questions, the default position people on your other team think, oh, that's not a priority because they never asked me about that. And so you have to check your motive sometimes and make sure that you're asking the right questions and you're communicating interest in the people that you're working with, and that you value what they're doing. Because then you find someday that they think you don't value it, and so they stop doing it, and then you have a problem. So it's important that you communicate. You know, Pastor Willie George, pastor of Church on the Move, said years ago, while he was pastoring, he said, I realized that one of those basic questions in staff meetings is I'd say two things like, okay, how many people are we running? What's the attendance? And okay, how big was the offering? And so what his staff began to hear is numbers matter and money matters. And there's a whole lot of other important questions that by not asking cause things that should be the priority to slip from becoming the priority, and then it became about numbers. That's a story he told on himself. Is I realized I was asking the wrong questions, and I had to apologize to my team because numbers is not the most important thing about ministry if you're not making disciples. Unfortunately, I think as a ministry, there were necessary changes that were never fully made because there was a changing of the guard, but important lesson is the questions you ask are important. The questions you're not asking are also important. So here's some general communication tips, and then we'll throw in a few scriptures. This is all sub-point on good authority figures communicate and care. Maybe you don't know how to communicate. Maybe you struggle with communication. So here's some tips. First of all, you can't have a good relationship without good communication. So if you don't have a good relationship with the people that you work with, that's on you. You have to improve your communication. Um, a thing that is important and can be helpful is to think about the other person's perspective. Think about their perspective. They're looking at things a little differently because of the position that they're in. They might have some value in insights that you don't have because of the way they're looking at it. But understand that, and maybe some of their misunderstanding is because they're looking at it from a different perspective. But be considerate of that perspective. It'll help with communication. Another thing is summarize your point of view in simplest form. So again, as communicating, it is very effective to keep things simple. The simpler it is, the easier it is to follow. And I've talked about in past lessons how you can put somebody on detail overload and they can't hear or remember anything that you said. This might be one of the videos that you have to review a few times because we're communicating so much details. But in general, the big stuff, communicate, keep it simple, summarize your point of view in simplest form. If you can't communicate what you're trying to communicate in simple forms, maybe you don't understand it as well as you need to. The other thing is listen carefully. Listening is the most important aspect of communication. Another big one is stay calm. Don't let your emotions govern the conversation. It won't be productive. Another is be respectful, open, and honest. It says in Proverbs 18:1, a man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He rages against all wise judgment. And so that's a big verse. A man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He rages against all wise judgment. So the reason why some people won't communicate and that they isolate themselves and get angry when you give them wise counsel is because they're seeking their own desire. That's what that verse says. So why is that person doing that? Why are they getting mad when you try and talk to them about it? Because they're seeking their own desire. They don't want to listen. And they're going to be stupid because they're raging against wise judgment. Um, Most important part of communication, listening. Okay, it's kind of reiterating a point I just said. But here's some listening tips. Look into the eyes of the people you are listening to. Um, this more than anything communicates, I really do care about what you have to say. I've been in a lot of meetings and talked to a lot of people where while I'm talking, they are surfing their phone. Um, that's a common thing among millennials is everybody's addicted to their phone and scrolling their phone. That is absolutely terrible communication etiquette. And if you're a bad listener, the last thing you want to be doing is scrolling your phone while somebody's talking to you. That's the rudest thing in the world. Don't do it. Look into the eyes of the person you're listening to. When you're looking at the phone, when you're looking off in the distance, when you're watching other people talk to other people, you're being rude. So if you can discipline your mind to focus and look at the person who's talking to you, it communicates value to them that what they're saying to you is valuable. And it's very useful and it'll help you be a better listener. Second thing is think about the point or concern that they're making. I come from a long line of Gordons that we often struggle in our listening skills. We're often better at our talking skills than we are listening. And that's something I know about myself, and trying to improve that. But one mistake that's common, I know I've struggled with it at times, is you're in a conversation and you check out when the other person is talking because you're just thinking about the next point that you're going to say. You're waiting for that moment where they take their breath, where you can jump in and say what you're thinking about. It's don't be rehearsing in your mind your answer before you fully caught all that the person is communicating. So make sure and don't fall into that trap. And I know sometimes people say, well, if I don't say it right then I'll forget what I was going to talk about. But that's not the point. The point is you're communicating that whatever springs into your head is the most important thing in the moment. And maybe it's not. Maybe this person who's trying to communicate with you and communicating value to them and valuing what they're trying to say is more important to you than communicating what you know, because you already know what you know, and that's not enough. You need this other person. So um, don't let yourself think about the next thing you want to talk about that you're not listening to the person who's talking to you while you're ready to jump in there with your thought. And then thirdly, this is just another tactic you can do. Repeat back a brief synopsis of what they just told you. So somebody's talking to you, and then, like, for example, I understand that my attitude was disrespectful and it made you angry, but what I'm trying to say is, and by doing that, you're acknowledging that you heard what they had to say. And if you can't repeat what they're saying, then it means you didn't listen to them. So that's sometimes a helpful thing to help sharpen up your listening. Proverbs 18:2 says, "A fool has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart." Some of the worst communication ever is when you have a couple fools that are just expressing their heart and nobody cares about knowing the truth. So that's an irritating conversation. Another principle is think before you speak. Proverbs 17:27-28, he who has knowledge spares his words, and a man of understanding is of a calm spirit. Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace. When he shuts his lips, he is considered perceptive. Proverbs 29:20 says, do you see a man hasty in his words? There is more hope for a fool than for him. So think before you speak. Don't speak evil when you're upset. Another one is communicate with kindness. Philippians 4:8 says, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of a good report, if there is any virtue and if there's anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. So if these are the things we're meditating on, and if we can communicate those kinds of things to other people, it's going to be really constructive communication. Another big one to communicate, maybe one of the biggest, is communicate a thankful heart. For the people you work with, and this is an area that I need to improve as well. But it's you really, because you really can't overdo thankfulness.